Hi and welcome. My name is Derek Feldman. So glad that you're with us today. This is our actual last webinar for Festival of Children before the end of the year. And so, of course, with that, we're talking about looking at how we did this year and evaluating our fundraising goals, of course. We're thankful that you're here with us for the next 45 minutes to the hour. We'll be spending some time, obviously, going through some evaluating our goals and what we've been doing. Of course, at the end of that time, after that review, we'll have some opportunities for you to ask some questions. We purposely left a little bit more time this time to discuss just fundraising in general towards the end. If you do have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss, given that we're really knee-deep in a lot of end-of-year fundraising efforts. So, like usual, we will provide this PowerPoint to you if you'd like that. You can access it in our Achieve Access area, which you have access to. And then, of course, we'll also have a video recording there, too, of this session as we're recording today. And if any of you need CFRE credits or any other sort of credits you're going for, feel free to let us know, and we'll make sure and get that to you, too, as well. So this is what I'm actually doing in this session today is walking you through some of the things that we do to evaluate fundraising programs with some of our clients. And one of the things that we like to do is actually a session like this with them in January. We typically do that in January since we have a really good sense of looking at the data throughout the year. And I would say, when I was doing leading fundraising efforts and doing my own annual goals, it was sort of funny that even in the first couple of years that I did fundraising, I never really looked at the data that well. And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years that I got into it and said, why start guessing so much around why or how we're doing this? And let's actually put some numbers and things around it. And so in today's conversation, it's really about looking at your yearly fundraising goals and efforts from a data perspective. And what I'd love for you to do is come out of here with some clear pieces for you to understand what you should be evaluating and looking at over the course of every year. So one of the first things I want to do is sort of set the stage and say that, of course, we want to remove the guesswork. You're going to find, too, that as you start to analyze some of your performance throughout the year, that you'll start creating a system. And that's really what you're doing is systematizing, if that's a word, some of your fundraising efforts. And I would say, too, that the goal is to create some sort of methodology or strategy that's actually based upon true performance. And I would say, too, that, the only thing we should be defending are the ones that actually work. As I've always had somebody come to me and say, Derek, should we do direct mail? It's not performing. Well, if it's not performing, then you don't do a direct mail. Yes, it's a traditional fundraising effort that a lot of people do, but if it's not performing how you need it, and it hasn't been performing at all, well then, maybe there's another approach that you should consider. So when we look at performance overall, we take a look at the actual numbers of reactions and the actual cash received from it. Now, I want to make a comment, though, about some fundraising efforts that have dual purposes. Probably the biggest effort of that is special events. So, for instance, some people will do fundraising performance or fundraising efforts in the year because, well, they raise money and they do something else, like maybe awareness or marketing or anything else from that perspective. But when we look at data, we look at it from a pure transactional standpoint to see what we actually had and did that performed in that manner. If you keep something around or you tend to do something, then you're going to have to determine for yourself how you want to evaluate the things that are not related to fundraising that have a fundraising element of it. So like the special event, you have to say to yourself, well, how much money did we actually raise from that? And then what else are we benchmarking against those fundraising efforts to say that it's a meaningful effort to continue to do? And we'll often get into big discussions with our clients who will say, well, Derek, that didn't actually generate money like your report says, but we still want to do it because it does generate these particular things in our community that we find very valuable. And again, I agree with that standpoint. It's just you're going to have to create additional benchmarks outside of fundraising to evaluate that overall. So from this perspective, though, everything we're going to talk about and most of the things that we evaluate performance on is based upon yearly performance of actual transaction data, not necessarily all of the other kinds of stuff that goes with it. So let's first talk about marketing, because we do have to discuss from our standpoint of how we're generating leads and information. It's kind of funny that I actually was sharing an email today with somebody else about what we think is going to happen in the future with fundraising. And of course, the future of fundraising is marketing and fundraising are together, and it's become much more of a concerted effort joined together to make sure that we're obtaining something in those efforts. Well, I'll say that the reason marketing is on this page first is because in the fundraising process, or what your marketing is doing for the fundraising process, is to generate people's awareness and contact information so that you can actually go to them and ask them for money. And so usually we don't like to include a ton of marketing and pure transactional pieces here, but I do it here because we have to understand this year's performance and how we were actually obtaining what we would call prospective leads to ask for money. And so, for instance, if you have on your website, you have a thing that says, sign up for our email. Well, how many email addresses did you actually get from that? And then later on, we'll want to find out how many of those actually became donors later on too. So when we think about marketing as it relates to fundraising in this perspective of evaluation of our year's goals, we have to understand how many people were obtaining either email address, and I put email address up there. It could even be physical addresses if you want to do that. How many of those are you obtaining through your website or social media, through events or any other types of marketing things in which your name is out there? How many of those did you obtain, so that we can look at what our actual goal was in 2012 and then what we want to do in 2013 from a minimum perspective, as you can see on the bottom there, which is sort of the minimum goal that we want to set, and then maybe the maximum, which would be a stretch goal. When we think about this acquisition of marketing, the goal here would be that we want our marketing to secure something for us. And if that is brand awareness, great. That's not what we're talking about today, because brand awareness could just be impressions. We were in the newspaper and 80 million people saw it, whatever that is. Or we want our marketing at the end of the day to do brand awareness, but also generate contacts for us that could be later used to ask for support, assuming that if somebody gives us their contact information, that they want to hear from us. So what we like to do is break down this sort of lead generation or donor generation, donor lead generation into two categories, as you'll see there. How many did we generate from what we would call just organic elements, from our website, from our social media, from our web concepts, anything that we had on the web, or any place that we had organically just always have something out there? This is that box that says sign up for our email newsletter. Then, how many did we take from a free perspective that we got when we went to go to the community fairs or anything else? How many emails or contacts did we generate at events? And if you're not tracking it, you should, because that should be determining whether or not you should go back and spend your time again at those events, of course. And then for some of you that might have the opportunity to do some online advertising, maybe you got a Google grant and you're doing ads or Facebook ads or YouTube ads in which that you're trying to generate emails or people to go to your webpage to give an email. Obviously look at that, or even in traditional advertising where you put something out as an ad or in a traditional print piece, or even in a radio ad, whatever that might be, and that you would ask people to go to a website to, receive their contact information. So in each one of these, you'll have to determine how much that you actually got in 2012 in both organic marketing, as I've got the descriptions there, in your marketing and your events that you do, then if you do any online advertising in the paid space or any traditional advertising. What we're finding right now is the trend that, let's just take email contacts, that of course around the lucky number, maybe unlucky, is around 18%. 18% of those contacts going bad this year through bounces, through just undeliverable or unsubscribes. So what you want to find out is is then actually going back to how many you've obtained, which is the goal that you'll put here, but also how many people left your lists. So the average is 18%, but you should probably figure that out for yourself. And you can do even that same thing by looking in your direct mail contacts. It's sort of tough sometimes when you need to scrub data where direct mail may not, you don't necessarily know the response. Nobody says that this was a bad address unless they sent it back to you. And so things that you get back in the mail, you would track to see how many of those direct mail addresses also go bad. And what you're doing here is saying, well, so in 2012, this is how we performed. The national average is 18% of people left our lists. So let's see what our average is so that we can actually create a very good goal for 2013. And then what that would do is that it obviously increases the amount of people that you can then ask for money from, which is really, the point of why we're talking about this marketing segment going into fundraising. So look at that at 2012, figure out how many total people unsubscribed, how many people you gained in each one of these efforts, and then decide from there what your goals will be over the coming year. And then, of course, creating the strategy from it. A couple things. You have to have something in place to generate ongoing people to your list. You just do. The saying is the more people you ask for money, the more money you will raise, because there's more likelihood that you're asking obviously more people to potentially get you those resources. If you're not focused on generating contacts to the organization or even putting contacts in from meetings and everything else, you're not going to have a big enough pool to get you the real money that you're looking for in the end. And so that's why when you're thinking about marketing and whatever that goal is that you have, is that we have to be very clear about how many contacts and generation leads that we want to get, or what will be the strategies. So for instance, if right now you don't really have anything, say in events or campaigns or marketing in that free space, that's where you would maybe work with your board and say, what are the events you think we need to be at to get our goal of getting 1,000 new names this year? That would be the kinds of things you would want to discuss with them. Or, do you have any marketing strategies such as, should we advertise in this to generate some contacts for us? Does anybody have experience? And ask your board if there's an opportunity there. Or even if some companies will allow you to put something in their newsletters and out to their consumers or anything else. I mean, those are all great opportunities, but they need to be evaluated on actual performance. Now, if you do some marketing activities, again, that don't generate any contacts, then you'll have to have your other sort of set of evaluation to say, well, we're going to do this because it, checks the box of awareness, and this is what we generate from it, and so on. Then after you understand your numbers, creating those strategies will be a little bit easier and make it very, very tangible for your board. And that's where you can come out of here and say a larger goal for your next year and say, well, this year we want to acquire, in 2013, we want to acquire 1,000 new people to our list. Why do we want to do that? Because we want to ask 1,000 new people for funds and dollars later on. And these are the things that we'll do in the free, and maybe we might venture into the paid space, but that's exactly what we're going to do. So hopefully that helps you evaluate that again. And again, 18% is the national on the email. Direct mail is a little funny, that number, so that's why I don't really talk about it too much. And so see what your actual rate is, and finding that out will help you determine how many new ones that you'll be able to need to offset the losses. The next one is in just fundraising and acquiring new donors overall. And so as we look at it, you can acquire new donors or acquire even your existing donors through different methods, of course. In the free space, it could be something like, we've got it, somehow over the years, we've acquired this lists of people. And this could be from marketing efforts that you've had in the past and so on. And of that, that's what we'll call our existing house file. It's in-house. That's why that word is used. And that house file contains people in it that don't give to us currently, but they read our information. They do all of the things that would be as a donor does, but they're just not a giver to us. So we would say that that existing house file, which is fed by those new contacts that we receive from the marketing, exists. And there's non-donors in there that we really want to become donors. In that marketing acquired context too, that marketing effort that we just talked about with the events and stuff will generate new ones for you as well. Some of your events that you might have too. And then lastly, maybe you have some honor memorial types of giving opportunities for people, planned giving efforts, all the other ones. But what we'd say is that this is a free space where you're not buying buying to try and get new donors. In a paid space, you might buy a direct mail list, or you might do an email list buy to try and get donors. And so from that perspective, we want to find out in 2012, out of all these contacts that we got from how the ones that we had before in this house file, from the contacts that we actually acquired through our marketing efforts, maybe from some of our events, or somehow else some of our partnerships with companies and all that, how many new donors do we get from those things that we have around us that were not necessarily contributors before? And then also looking at if some of you do buy direct mail lists or do a list buy over the course of maybe some of your campaigns, how many new donors came from those particular buys too as well. And then setting obviously 2013 minimums and then maximum goals too. A couple things that you would want to make sure and understand as you're looking at what we would call a house file, our marketing, our events, and memorials. When we think about a house file, that's again that list of people that you just over the years have brought together and have had. We have found on average with our clients, not necessarily nationwide, but this is with our clients, that anytime that we send a solicitation to that group of people, that the yearly average is about 6% of those people who were on our list that we somehow got became donors at some time with us. That's 6%. That's the average that we like to use with some of our clients. It may not be yours, but that's something that you should find out, of course, for your own organization. We find that the same thing happens with marketing and events. And sometimes it can vary between 6 and 10%, but it's roughly around, we like to use 6% of the conservative number to use as our benchmark, that the people that we've acquired, 6% of those will somehow become donors, your email lists and so on. In the paid space, much, much lower. The national average is 1%. Sometimes you can get to a 1.5% if you buy a direct mail list that's very targeted. But that's kind of where that is. And then email list buys are even less than that. We're talking like 0.02% at times to a 0.05%. So those are national, and what we would say that the first averages are not national. They're more what we use as standards. That's just something for you to think about in your benchmarking. But understand for yourself, in 2012, our contacts that we had, how many of those became donors, and see what that percentage was. And how you can really do that, if you haven't tracked that throughout the year, is if you have a database, just look at who were new donors that came in over the course of the last year, and then cross-reference that with your email list or your direct mail list that you've already had. So very simple piece for you to do, and then you can start setting up that reporting function going forward. Also, if you do, and any of the things that we talk about with some of these reporting things, going back to your database provider and asking them to help you on some of this is very common. And in fact, we when we work with a group, we actually give them a list that they need to give to their database software provider to say, these are the things we want to run. Can you help us set these up as standard reports every month that we can do? So it's just something that you can do on a monthly basis, and get it set up for you would be something that usually these database companies will do for you. Your software like your Blackbaud, Convios, eTapestry kind of stuff. So house file, marketing acquired, events, honors, memorials, roughly 6 to 8% is something that we like to use as a benchmark. If you have much higher, that's wonderful, but something that you want to track for yourself. And then, of course, looking at the 2013 and then creating those goals from there. So if in 2012 you created, if you acquired through this way, through your house file, let's just say, and marketing efforts, events, and all that, let's just say 500 new donors, a simple number. Then you would want to see how that compared to 2011 and see what your growth rate has been, or if you remain flat. And then depending on if you're going to invest or do anything new, you would want to maybe increase that percentage for 2013. And I'm getting a question now from somebody here in the audience that says, what would be a good growth that you would say is very natural from, say, a 2012 to 2013? Well, if you're going to stay maybe in your existing budget, right? So in your existing budget in 2012, you didn't do anything spectacular or different. Then a 3 to 5% increase in donors is very common. Maybe you did some new messaging and so forth, but you didn't go out and expend a lot of resources. If you're getting up to 10% or 12, 15%, we typically see high percentages like that when organizations are investing in marketing agencies and others to go out there and acquire donors that way. We don't see a ton of that growth happening just with your existing house files and all of that. That exponential growth happens with definitely securing of some outside resources to help you. But then you have to look at, even if you do have a 10% growth and you're expending those resources, you're going to be spending money to make money, which is very common, but you might be spending a lot more money to make money this time if you're using that. For instance, in the work that we do, somebody would say, well, we'll bring you in to help us get a lot of donors, and then, we'll help work on the retention from there. And then, maybe we'll look at doing that again at another time. And what that does is they want to bolster the number of donors and increase their gifts over the course of, say, 2 to 3 years before they do another big acquisition program. So on the direct mail list buys, if you're interested, we can chat later at the end as we have a little bit more time about some places you can go to. Again, a 1 to 1.5%. But the thing is that those donors are really great donors over time. If you continue to upgrade those, it pays off. It may not pay off right now as well. So hopefully that helps you look at the new donors that you have, and then of course you'll want to understand not just the new ones that you've acquired from this list, but how many of your donors did you renew that you already had at major giving levels and at the lower levels too. And so that's what we look at when we have a donor composition piece that you'll see on your screen now. And that is the number of new donors, our goal versus actual donor who has never given, number of new major donors who went into the new category at that level, number of donors who increased their gift to certain gifting ranges, upgraded donors who renewed our lapsed 12 to 24 months. And then, as you can see towards the bottom there, what we call super lapsed. Those are donors that 24 plus months. And I will say that we categorize them as super lapsed donors because they were a donor at one time. But I will say that when we solicit them, they really receive the same acquisition elements that our new donors, our lists that we have would receive too. And that's because they need to be reacquired, just like a new donor does. They've been gone for some years, and maybe even 5 to 10. And so things have changed, messaging has changed, and so we look at how we would want to acquire them, just like anybody would be on any list that we would have. A couple things here that's important. The breakdown and composition of your donors over the course of the year is very, very important. In fundraising, we always talk about these triangles, right? So we want to have a great triangle looking piece of our donors where we have a lot of donors supporting us at lower levels. And then of course we want a lot of donors supporting us at big levels, but usually it's the 80-20 rule at the top where, a significant amount of major donors or significant amount of dollars comes from those few major donors. If we look at this composition, we want to say, look at how we're doing in 2012, and then obviously looking at stretch goals over the course of that. And if you had to look at this top part, this individual contributions, some things that you will want to point out that we really like to see, that obviously the number of donors, it's natural for the number of donors from level 5 to level 1 to decrease. That's because you'll have a lot of donors who are at that lower level, and then obviously those that are giving at the highest level, you have fewer of those. We like to see, though, also healthy, what we would look at is a healthy movement from a level 5 to a level 1. And what that means is that we have, 500 donors at the level 5, which they're giving $1 to maybe $100, and our level 1 donors, we have say 10 or 20 of those. That's a healthy movement down, and it would look like a natural triangle. If you have a lot of donors that are at the lowest level, and you have a lot of donors at the highest level, you look like an hourglass, right? So it's skinny in the middle. And what that means is that you need to spend more time in 2013 trying to get those lower level donors to upgrade to you, to higher levels. And if we see, and even if you trend it over the course of 2 to 3 years, if you see that, wow, we've always had 100 donors at level 5 and only 5 at level 1, and it's been consistent that way, it means that you need to ask for more dollars from those lower level donors. And also you might want to consider things like a monthly giving program where people get into higher levels. If they're at $50 now and if they're at, say, $50 now and you did, say, $10 a month, well, then they're already into the next category, and you can try and get them to upgrade to a monthly giving level. So you want to make sure that your triangle looks really well, has that level 5, has a great flow down into a level 1, and that you have people in the middle categories there that you can continue to upgrade, continue to move from one level to the next. And the nice thing about looking at your donor composition this way is that what you're really doing too is looking at the number of donors that support the amount of money in that category. I always love it when we'll look at fundraising performance and we'll sit down and somebody will say, well, Derek, hey, we're so excited. We raised $50,000 this year. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. That's really wonderful. Well, now why don't you break down the number of donors so we can actually figure that out? Well, yeah, it came from 10 donors instead of 500 donors. So sustainability is probably, sustaining donor issues is going to come into play here. And so when you're actually looking at the number of donors over the course of this last year, you can kind of see where your trends are when it comes to how your donors are coming in, and then you can make decisions over the course of 2013 to say, well, we want to work really hard by getting our $1 to $100 donors or $100 and less donors to get to 100 and 250. And this is specifically the strategies that we're going to do. Maybe a monthly giving. We're going to ask for more in direct mail requests. We're going to do more personal visits with those donors at that lowest level to try and get them to the upgrade. And once we're with them, we'll only do personal asking at $100 or above. So things like that will help you determine what you really want to accomplish in 2013 to 20 in the minimums and maximums. A couple things that I would want to just make sure that you understand is that when we do donor composition like that, and we look at, well, we want to increase 10% of our donor base to increase their gifts even higher. That's a good goal to put out there. But if you have no experience or no data talking about how your donors did increase each year, or the number of those that have and at what level, that will probably be unattainable. What we have seen, though, is that we have put benchmarks like a 10% or 20% of our donors to increase to the next level. And that is very doable if you have specific strategies that say this is exactly how we're going to make that happen. I will say that most donor upgrades from that middle category higher do require, and most successful fundraising strategies require, in-person asking. Yes, we have seen donors that upgrade from the $1 to $100, and even to that next category, level 4, through like direct mail appeals and email. But anything beyond that, I would question any strategy that didn't have some sort of in-person asking element to it, because it just has not been, we haven't seen too much great success with that. So again, donor composition, let's look at actually the number of donors in each category, and then plot out what you really want to have happen in 2013. Make sure we need to get to that healthy triangle looking piece rather than being really like the hourglass or some other sort of shape that I don't know that I could say right now. But you really do need to make sure that you get to some very healthy looking composition as well. And by the way, these are great things to show to your board. And then you can say, well, board, if we're going to do this, this is where I need you to come help me, because we need more people to ask from people. We need more people to ask our existing donors to upgrade their gifts. We only have myself or our marketing person or our development director, and that's it. So the more people we have, means that we can actually reach this stretch goal that we really want to do. And that's where you can really get them involved as well. So a couple key additional metrics to consider. And then I want to talk about what you should look at per campaign when you're looking at doing some of your evaluating of your goals. The first one here is, what is your average gift online versus offline? It's always good to know that so that when you're talking about what it is you want to raise, say for instance, if you have a donor, or if you're in a board meeting and somebody says, well, we want to raise $10,000 for XYZ. If you always know your average gift, you could say to them, okay, so if you want to raise $10,000 and it's $100 is our average gift, we're going to need 100 of those people to do that. So we need 100 donors, and let's start plotting out 100 donors. So it's always good to understand what your average gift is and how that has changed over the course of the year or two. Assuming that you're doing some really great things with marketing and some fundraising strategies, you can increase that average gift. And that might be one of your stretch goals for 2013, is to increase it by $5. By the way, if you start to try and increase it by, say, $50 to $75 in 1 year, that's great. Usually you're probably in a capital campaign structure, or you're in something that again, you're using some other agency or something to help you get to that point. We'll see incremental growth in the average gift anywhere between $5 and $10. But really around 5 is much more common that we'll see than we would see anything north of, say, 10. Attrition rates for each channel. And what that means is that, how many donors are you actually losing this year? And the answer is you don't want to lose anybody, but it's going to happen. There's natural attrition, right? Which is unfortunately death and moving or whatever that is. And so you'll want to look at what that attrition rate is there, but also what is your attrition rate when it comes to email? How many of those email donors are you losing, or online donors too? Average response rates, how many people respond to your stuff when you send it out to ask for a solicitation? Or ask for money. And so, when you send a direct mail out, are you going to be in the 6%? Are 90% of your donors going to react? What is it? What's your average response rates? And, one of the things that I like to do is I actually always put these on a cheat sheet little card that I had with me in my notebook, so that if any of our board members or anything, and it always happened where it said, we need to raise this amount of money, I started to qualify it within the amount of donors we need and the response that we would get to probably make it happen. And so, for instance, if we said our average online gift is $100 and our average response rate is only 10%, well, then we're going to need to ask, maybe 10,000 people. Not 10,000, we'll need to ask 1,000 people to get us to 100 donors, to give us $100. So that just kind of breaks it down for you to help you understand what that is. The best thing you should always do when you look at attrition rates and average response rates is do incorporate goals to try and make those response rates better. And so, if you're at 6 or 10%, say, what do we want to do to get to 11? And use that as an opportunity to brainstorm with your board. Things like, well, we're going to use new marketing. We're going to rebrand it. We're going to communicate it very differently, the need. We're going to do a visual piece. We're going to do maybe a video. Those are all things to present the need different to get a higher reaction. On the attrition rate, that would obviously be stewardship. We want to solve or to better our attrition rate. We're going to create a much more streamlined stewardship program that's going to involve these experiences, events, calling, all of those things. I mean, attrition is directly related to stewardship. And then fulfillment on percent that fulfill upgrade request. That's always a good one to know. It's, how many people do we, when we ask for more money, respond to that? Again, that's a great goal so that you can understand when you start asking for more money, how many people will really take you up on the offer. And then percent of donors that move from online to offline as well. It's always a good stat to know because I always like you're going to be asked in the boardroom, or if you're already contemplating whether or not you get rid of direct mail, it's always a good stat to know. And by the way, you'll find out that it's very interesting that a lot of people move from online to offline. It's a very common thing, which is why direct mail is not left. And so when you're looking at that percentage, it's always good to know so that your board will say to you, if you're in a board meeting, well, let's cut out direct mail. Well, if you say, well, if we cut out direct mail, realize that a lot of them do give through that mechanism. And so we'll have to substitute it for some other mechanism to try and raise that money. And then response rates to direct mail acquisition versus a renewal. So how many, what is your response that's different in that direct mail, just to make sure that people understand that as well. These are key metrics. I, again, always like to have, I keep it in a notebook when I was doing fundraising, because one of the things I wanted to do is I always knew that, and I was always asked off the cuff from board members to other people about some of these things. And then I could do the math. If they said, well, we want to raise this money, what's possible? And, do I have people in mind? And then we started to look at, well, if we mathematically put it out, what could actually happen? And then these are good things for you if you have a team of people, if you don't, if you have a development committee, a volunteer committee, to say, well, this is what we actually want to try and make better. And this is what we want to try and work on over the course of this next year, is to get more people to respond. I mean, all of this is about raising more money. And if you're able to bring it down a little bit more, you'll have a better idea there. This is what I have in front of you right now. If you took all that information and started to map it out overall, and what it is your annual campaign what we call a campaign, which is your annual yearly fundraising efforts. And as you see here, you can see how many things you sent, what it cost you, print cost, postage, email if you sent, and so on. And in that top part there is just a cost feature. And then on the bottom, you would say, well, okay, so if we send all that material, the total sends, as you can see there, and we have average response rates overall of these campaigns, and this means that this is how many people will give and then what our average gift might be. And so therefore, this is the total amount that we'll raise. And so from that perspective, you'll be able to do some things here to map out your goals for next year. This also is a really great piece to say, well, this is how much we're going to spend to try and make money. And this is the cost that's commonly referred to as the cost to raise a dollar. So if we're spending X amount of dollars to raise X amount, that's what it is. Now, I just put in dummy numbers in here, so don't worry about what you see here as actual numbers. But what you can find out and discover from here is that just this simple form, and by the way, if you want this, I have it in an Excel document. I can email it to you, so you can just simply print it or plug in the numbers for you and do some of the calculations you can. But in here, this really is helpful for you just to get a snapshot picture of what you're going to be spending, how you're going to be spending it over the course of the year, when you want to do it, and then what's the kind of money you expect to raise. But you can't fill that information out unless you looked at this last year from that annual perspective. It's a really great, simple snapshot I like to use with when I'm working with an organization, and I often encourage them to use this when they're talking with their board about fundraising and helping to educate them. And somebody said to me recently, they said, Derek, would you spend time talking and training the board on asking for money, or would you spend then helping them understand how all of this, like rates to raise a dollar and all of that? And one of the things that I told them is that it's a two-part thing. Before you start asking people for money, you have to help your board understand how people give to you and how the efforts that you're currently doing and the responses that you get, because they'll understand and appreciate that you have a track and a pulse on it before you get into there and just saying, well, we want you to go out and ask for money. Well, it's much more powerful when you can say, so now that you understand, when we send stuff out, what our responses will get and the kinds of approaches that we're using and what those responses get. So now one of those important elements is for us to reach that big goal that we talked about of 1,000 new donors or 500 new donors. We need you to go out and ask for money specifically to help us do that, or to ask for more money because we want to get to that goal, and this is what the response will be. So it just helps them understand it. And so it's context. And I always like fundraising trainings that do that provide, first, this is what we do and this is how people give to us and the responses. And then this is how I want to train you on how to improve those and go out and ask for money. As you look here too on the next sheet, this is a donor flow chart that we like to use. When we say acquisition channels, how big is our list on that mid-size there? And then on the right is how many donors do we have in these gift ranges that we discussed earlier? What are we going to do to renew them and then to upgrade them? in each of the categories. It's just a nice visual piece to show how many people represent in each one of those categories. And again, I got this too. If you want a copy of this, you can fill this out. And it just helps us. It helps. I'm a visual person. It helps say all of the ways that we get contacts on the left generate our list in the middle. And what we do from that list in the middle is we use these tactics like a direct mail or a phone-a-thon or whatever it is to get them to become an annual donor. And of that total list, we have this many who are actual donors in each of these categories. And it's a way to help people understand how you process a contact through to become a donor, and then what is the actual donor composition going forward. This is a great one to look at and map out how you did 2012, and then help them understand what you want 2013 to look at too as well. So I want to actually show you one more piece before we get to some Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those into the GoToWebinar panel now. We'll discuss this, but given that this is our one of our final pieces for the year, you can ask anything, even end of year fundraising stuff if you'd like to. But what I wanted to do is actually show you how good data and good goal evaluating how your performance can really help you when you're trying to think about or when you're trying to go out and ask for money through email, direct mail, personal asking in different ways. I'm going to show you a sample piece that you'll see here. This is based upon an end of year from last year. This organization raised, actually saw a 42% increase in donations. They got 19,000. They ended up getting 20, and this is a direct mail segment. But what this does for us is in this campaign, it helps us to determine, where did a lot of the emails or the donations come from? It maps it out a little bit nicer. And then, where those total gifts, the lapsed donors, how many new donors, the average gifts online. In this case, this organization first got into email last year. This is somebody we helped. And as they were going through email, it was a really, really great piece. 21% of the total donations actually came from that. They raised $4,700, I believe, from it, a total. And when you looked at just the direct mail, we analyzed which week does really great. This is last year. And as we look at, next week was always a really great week for them, where they started to raise substantial amount of dollars. And then obviously the week of Christmas, it went down and then went back up the week of the last year, which is very common. And as we see this is just a great piece for people to understand how gifting can actually happen, and where we see the longevity of their direct mail, the total gifts, the largest gifts as well. This was a health organization, so that's why you see prostate group. They were targeting prostate donors or prostate affected lists, and so they only got 6 from them. So it wasn't necessarily a great list, but so this was a health cancer organization that we worked with. This is an email. Definitely shows where the data can show you. Most of their, the greatest thing about their email campaign is that it was a great piece for their people to renew, and it was also a really great piece, a small piece for those that were newly acquired. And what this did is it helped us to say, well, yeah, we when we look at email, at least in this last campaign, it's a great opportunity to make sure donors renew, and it helps our attrition. It provides another opportunity to get those donors to renew with us online rather than sending it through check, which was great. People were giving large gifts of $1,000 to as well, but the average gift was pulled down to about $6 because we took out the outlier in there, of course. And we had good response rates overall. They were very pleased with that. And then when we even looked at Fred as their executive director, we even looked at some of their emails and how many clicks, how many clicks did well and which email subject lines were the best and so on. But all of this helped us to understand different open rates, and it helped us to figure out what they want to do this year and how they want to fashion 3 emails or 2 emails and what they want to have occur with that. So they were all very, very good from that perspective. And then lastly, of course, looking at the different categories. One of the things that this organization has is the donations that actually came in were a lot on that that level 4 that we were talking about earlier. The majority came in the level 5 and level 4, And as we saw, that they were pretty consistent across the others, which this is a really, this is a really good showing here, which also means that people are coming in. It boosts their average giving, their average gift higher. And so when we looked at doing campaigns this year, we also looked at how we can make sure that we actually ask for larger amounts rather than the $25 or $10, because the average gift was much higher and people were making those requests. And so we want to see if it really, really helps us from that perspective. So a couple final thoughts, but I just wanted to share that with you. It's just an example of how you can use data to help understand from a visual perspective. A couple thoughts. I always have, think about the 5 data points you really care about. The average gift, the number of, what is the response rates? I always had the 4 or 5 things that I always made sure I knew, and I always helped my organization and the board figure out, talk about those things consistently so that we could use those as our benchmarks going forward. Healthy organization, you really, and I mean organization-wide, if you're a one-person shop that's just you, then you need to help your board. You need to help your board understand what things that you track and why you care about those things. So it's always one of those where you can say, well, this is how much we raised, right? Well, yeah, but I would really break it down and say, well, this is why we track. Why educate your board along the way in board meetings to say, well, we track our average gift because we want to understand that if we make X amount of requests, that on average we're going to get this back. That helps us do some of our calculations and so on. So it's a really, really great move that way. Track with the real numbers, of course. And I often say that we always use accounting volunteers to do our 990s and our taxes and everything else, or do our finances. They are incredible data people. And if you give them some of these things, use a great accounting volunteer or somebody that has financial experience to run some of these numbers for you, because they'll map it out and then create the mechanisms that you need to help that going. And so don't just think about them as your accounting and budgeting. Also think about how they can help you on this side. And I've always found that they love that too, because it's a great tracking tool, or it's a great tracking piece that they can get into. So hopefully this has helped you think about your evaluations of your goals and how you can really look at over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So a couple things is that if you have any questions right now, feel free to put those in, and we got a couple in right now. And then also, again, we'll have this PowerPoint presentation to you. If you need it, just respond, and we'll also upload into Achieve Access. The video recording too is available there. So one of the questions that comes in is, yes, the question is around, can we send out some of the other materials that I mentioned in here? Absolutely. Then the second part of the question is, we are looking at substantially increasing our donations next year because we have a building project that we need to do. How would you recommend an organization budget or create a goal that's realistic if they have no experience with raising bigger dollars for bigger projects like that? Yeah, very, very good. I think I understand you're saying that next year you have a need to raise a lot more dollars than it's typical. You have a project, it's building related, very common, and what's realistic based upon your donor base. So there's a couple things that you'll have to take into account. We do, if you don't have a lot of donors to go to for that kind of thing, we do tend to see that substitution effect to occur, which would mean if you just went out to your existing donors and said, we have this one-time special need request, some donors at the lowest levels, not your mid or highers, will make what we call a substitution gift, which is, okay, great, I believe in you and I'll give you that money. But they sometimes won't give in addition to that. They'll just say, that's my annual contribution to you. So I always looked at by saying, well, to our lowest level of donors, we want to make sure that maybe we don't solicit them. That's an option. Or if we do solicit them, that we ask them to contribute both a building project and their annual gift together, so they don't do the substitution effect. And then when you look at that, is you would say, well, let's just put a qualifier on that. If you knew how much people actually gave you more money when you requested it, you could say, well, anytime we do upgrades, 6% of the people respond, if that's the number. If it's only 10%, then I would say, well, we'll do a 10% increase. But because this is a special case, sometimes we'll even add an extra 5% or 10%, only because assuming that this is a special project, it's a one-time thing, your donors will get that. They tend to respond and react to that nicely. So there's a couple things packed in there. One is make sure that when you're doing this calculation that, if you have a need for that amount of money, that could be your goal, but I've always found that what you need isn't necessarily the philanthropic goal. They don't necessarily match all the time. And so I would say that at a very least, if you put that request out there, 10% of the donors responding would give to that special project. And so therefore we could probably raise half to 3/4 of it through philanthropy. And we want to raise it all, but realistic goal setting, we might do it like that. Now, if we're talking big capital campaign, that's a totally different subject than this. And that big capital campaign would have a gift range chart that would have the typical, 20% of our 20 to 30% of the dollars coming in from a very select small few group of people, or actually even higher, 50% coming from a very few select people. The other thing that I would say too is when you're budgeting for philanthropy for like a big project like this, is that I typically like to go to major donors before the rest of those lower level donors that we talked about first. And you would have a contingency plan to say, well, if our major donors, because you would have conversations with them, don't respond, then we'll keep going further down the line from there. And so I would say something like, we're going to ask level 1 major donors to go for the gift first. And depending on where we are, we may not need to go to the lowest level of donors so that we don't do something like a substitution issue too as well. So there's another strategy that you could use. The next question that comes in is around email, and that is, do you have any suggestions for an average email gift? Ours is across the board. We have a few people who've given and responded to it at $200 and above, and then we've got maybe 10 people that are below $10. Oh, well, how do you create an average gift when you have such a wide range? It's tough. I would actually, if you've got like 2 or 3, take out the outliers. You saw it in that report that we did. And so I would look at what your average gift is by taking those people out all the time. The other thing that I would do too is that I would try and, within your emails, of course, try and do some suggested higher giving average gifts so that if it's like lower than $10, which it sounds like, that would be much better. I will say that average nationwide, I mean, we're talking in the 60s to 70s, not necessarily even that low as $6. We do see that campaigns a lot when they're asking for $5 or $10 campaigns requests, but we've seen it much higher than that. The average gift in direct mail through a newly acquired donor is at $35, which is always low, but then it tends to increase nicely over time, of course, as you continue. But for the first time, it's around 35. So hopefully that helps. I would suggest that your average gift is probably really low right there. And I would also probably suspect that if it looks like that you probably just started doing email fundraising and you don't have trends enough yet to look at it. And yes, she's just posted and said, yes, that's the case. So, I would say that I would just hold off right now and just do some average comparisons with the national. But I would probably look at, the course of the next year to figure out what that national piece or what the average could be for you. A next question comes in, which is around, would you recommend actually buying direct mail lists as a method to get new donors? So we do that for clients, and it was interesting because even the clients we do it for were suspect even when we do that for them. I'll say that the loyalty is that those direct mail donors acquired, the ones that we have studied, at least with ours, has stuck around and have tended to increase their gifts over time. So it was a great piece like that. I will say though that it's an investment to do it. And if you're just going to buy a list and send the same thing that you would probably do to any of your other donors, I wouldn't do it then. And the reason I say that is because the first time you really need to stand out. And so a lot of the things that we have seen be really effective is, it's a nice looking package and it's a direct mail. I mean, to get their attention and to try and say, we want to stand out. I mean, with an average response rate of only 1 to 1.5%, you need to, from that perspective. So, but if you're just going to send the same old stuff, I wouldn't do it. And they say that's the definition of insanity, right? So, but I wouldn't send the same thing and expect a huge result. Because if you are sending that same thing to your house list, remember that list that you've just acquired over time, and you're not getting that big response, I doubt it that if you bought a list, you're going to get a huge response that way. So, so what I would do though is it is a good way to sometimes do two things. I have always looked at buying lists as a way to build brand awareness too. And so things like we've done inserts of rat cards, small rat cards as part of a direct mail package where we talked about events that they could, educational events, program opportunities, and so forth. And so, it was almost like it came out of marketing and development because it had opportunities to build brand awareness or send people to a website, sign up for a class, or, do something else in addition to just the direct mail. So in looking at it like that, it could be a little different. I would say, though, that if you have an opportunity to buy and if you have the resources, it is a good piece to do. And it's also a great piece to test messaging as well and different approaches to raising money. We definitely like to see that. The costs, out of all the direct mail list houses in the country, we usually see the average of being anywhere between $75 to $125 per thousand names. That's direct mail addresses. So that's $75 to $125 per thousand. So if you calculate like that, if you want to send 10,000, you're going to spend about $1,500 buying a list. So that's kind of what the averages are if you go out there and buy lists from list houses too as well. There are some interesting lists, and there's change.org is a platform that's new that you can do petition-based campaigns, and then they tout a higher reaction rate. And actually, a webinar in 2013, we're going to have them on to talk about what they're doing and seeing from their giving levels too. So that's a pretty exciting one. So that's kind of my view on direct mail. Yes, I would do it if you had the resources to test and stand out. I would not do it if you're expecting something different from just sending the same stuff. So hopefully that helps. Well, we're near the end here, and I'm sorry there's a couple questions that are coming in. Feel free to just email me those too as well. But I want to say that I want to thank you all for attending today, but thank you also for just doing the great work you're doing. It's a hard job, and stuffing envelopes and doing all the non-fun things are a part of it. And I remember those days too. And it's just it can be sometimes very daunting, but at the end, I know that you find very rewarding, as do I. And so, from a fellow fundraiser to you, I just want to say thank you for all of your work. Sticking with it. Fundraising isn't easy. It's a toughie. And so, hang in there. Some of the worst days were always, complemented by some of the best days where you get to see the people that you help, from all the funds that you've raised. So I would just want to say a big thank you for all of your work. Congratulations on a great year if you had one, and if you didn't have one, 2013 will look even better, I guarantee it. But for you, I'm sure. And so thank you for all your hard work. Great job this year. Look forward to some great webinars next year. A couple of things that we're going to be doing differently. We'll have one session at the beginning of the month that will be dedicated towards practices and ideas for you. And then the second session in that month will be an interview with people who are in the field and in organizations and showing some examples. And so it'll be an interview and a display and a showcase of what's working that we've seen. So we'll announce all of that right at the 1st of January for you to get excited about, of course, and hopefully that you'll participate. Again, thanks for everything that you do. Thanks for joining today, and I wish you a great holidays, and we'll see you in 2013. Bye-bye.